So you've done the self-help and you've dipped into some personal development, but now you ask the question, now what? What can you do? Well, if you want to escape the apathy, step right this way. So twice a year, I teach a course called AUTONOMY. It's a 12-week personal development and training course. What people get out of it is multifaceted. There's curriculum, there's exercises, there's camaraderie, you make new friends. There's a whole lot of interesting things. We're going to hear a sample from the course right now, and let's take a look at the value these students are getting. Howdy, Mike.
Richard, this lecture is just full of golden nuggets and bombshells, and this is certainly one of the things I love about continuing to listen to this stuff over and over again every time until I get it right, as far as I'm concerned. And I can think of there's a couple things that spoke to me in this lecture. Certainly that Guy Ritchie interview, I think, is really powerful, and then certainly that the idea of frustration leading to aggression and depression, and using thinking and questions and learning to overcome that. The compelling offer, the create your own economy, the excellent closer, busy closing for clients, I think, is another beautiful piece. And then the whole offer that you're given to autonomy graduates, is just, that's the return on investment in this thing. So I want to talk about the two things in the Guy Ritchie video.
Yeah.
He talks about the essence of the narrative, and before he's talking about wearing the armor. But he's talking about that narrative and that idea of, people worried about what other people think versus like knowing what the narrative really means and how where that meaning is for you and owning that. So would you mind addressing that part of what Guy Ritchie was saying?
Yeah, the gist is, I think it's in the first couple slides next week. It's going to be you have to prostitute yourself in the world to discover your own true value, meaning that the first couple jobs you go out and do aren't going to be your highest paying jobs, and you're probably going to have to like work a little harder because you're the new person, you're low on the totem pole, these sort of things. But when you know your value and you can go out and articulate it clearly in a market set on your own terms, right? You're not asking for a job that someone else is offering. You're going to the market and saying, I have this offer, and people are coming to you. It's a high pressure versus low pressure situation. So the high pressure is the prostituting of yourself, giving away more value than and not receiving the compensation that you could ask for from the market because you don't know any better yet. You don't have any self-respect. You don't have that composure or confidence yet because you haven't done the learning, the iterations, and the other things that you need to get through that. So once you do adult or go through that rite of passage and say, oh, I see how the game is and I can make my own offer to the market. And a lot of times the person you're going to make that offer to is going to say no. And that's okay. But you can also go to the market and ask again to other people. And one of those down the line might say yes. And if you persist, you'll be successful. And if not, maybe you were better off being an employee for a while until you get to that level where you're like, oh, I can easily transition. You made an offer to get this job, you can make an offer to get this job. But if you're always waiting for someone to offer you a job, that's a someday maybe process and might not work according to your landlord's schedule for fee, these sort of things. So instead of waiting for the wind to come and maybe someday push you along in the direction, learn how to have a motor on your boat and go whatever direction you want, and learn how to get fuel for that boat. And that has to do with bringing service to the market. Even if you're living in a cabin out in the middle of nowhere, if you don't bring your furs into town once a year and get some money for sugar and salt and the other things that you can't make on your own out there, right? You're going to be, you won't be smoothing it. You'll be having a hard time.
The other thing I wanted to bring up is, I wish I had this course 20, 30 years ago.
I'm working on a time machine. I'll let you know. You'll be one of the.
There was an incident, when I first got out of school, I had worked as an intern for a company, and as an intern, they kind of gave us the opportunity to go to each department and spend like a week, checking out.
Yeah, and get a feel for what they do.
So forth.
Yeah.
And so when I got to the accounting department, they were implementing this new software and they needed somebody that had some kind of field experience and stuff, and they had spent some big money for this software package, and they didn't really have anybody that knew what to do or had the time to do it, and so they offered it to me, and then I asked for another one of the interns, and we basically put the manual together to implement this software, which was a purchase order program.
Yeah.
And so I went and I interviewed each part, and like part of the whole process of all the things that we did to issue purchase orders, and really got into how to build houses, and each of the steps and tasks involved, and each of those being issued a purchase order. But I did the internship. I created the manual. We put the manual out. We gave each superintendent or builder a manual with how to do it and everything like that. And I went back to school, and 6 months later I got hired, and I came back, and nothing had changed. The manual basically got on the shelf, and nobody really utilized what we had implemented. And so I got the opportunity. I was out in the field, and I was an assistant builder, and my builder took a leave of absence because his wife was having trouble with her pregnancy, and so then I was put in charge, like right out of the gate, and I started implementing, what I had learned and how we put this thing together. And within like 3 months, I had tripled productivity, and pretty much all of our subcontractors were just giddy because they were getting 3 times the amount of work out of the same people. And at the same time, my paycheck was going up tremendously because I was getting a bonus on all these. We were building like $300,000 kind of high end production homes, and typically you build about 10 a year.
Sure.
And so bonus was based on that, and I was 3x in that, within the first few months, and we had a line of work ahead of us, so it was no problem for me to just keep starting new projects because we had backlog, and so I'm just knocking it out. And the owner of the company called me into his office, and he said to me, "I'm looking at your paycheck, and you're making too much money." He basically said, with this situation, you're going to make more than the vice president of the company.
Good.
And that's going to be a problem.
For the vice president, it's no problem for me though, boss. So just keep it on the down low.
Yeah, well, I was like, I was kind of like the deer in headlights kind of situation. I didn't know what to do other than to say, I'm not taking a pay cut,
Yeah, I mean,
and I ended up having to quit, but I didn't know how to communicate with the president of the company. And, he was,
because if you could have maintained that job, and they
Exactly.
wouldn't have lost the star player. Right?
Exactly. And the company went bankrupt, because of these
they didn't bring in
things.
enough money to pay the rest of the vice presidents who won't take a less. All right. So it's not about downplaying what a vice president does in those situations. But the reality is, oftentimes, especially like in a software company, you'll have salespeople making more than everyone else in the company except the CEO or the chairman. And maybe the lawyers, like you can have a salesperson in a software company. Let's use companies I've worked at. There's been like salespeople that make $5 million. Well, a lot of the executives make 1 or 2 million, and that salesperson is not making 5 million every year. It might be 5 million and then 10 years before they have another year like that, if ever. Right. But they could easily make $500,000 to $1 million, and they had a good year. They had some good contract. They had some good connection. They were able to like bring in like a windfall. Like I remember in 97 at my first job, somebody signed a site agreement with Microsoft. It was like buku bucks. Microsoft had to have a license for everyone at the company for the software. right? So there was like thousands of licenses. They just throw a huge number. So I learned early that like the guy I worked for, I was an inside rep and my field rep. So I was telesales on the East Coast. I had Silicon Valley accounts. So I had a field sales rep on the West Coast. His name was Robbie. And Robbie, he is very hands off because I did most of the work. So he's like out golfing, he's like whining and dining client, whatever he's doing. He calls me one day, he's like, hey, I'm gonna quit, I'm gonna resign. And I'm like, oh no, I'm gonna have to break in a new outside rep. He's like, no, you have all the accounts, you have the relationships, you can play your card and take over my position. And here's how he talked to me through it. He's like, you just tell Brad this, this, and this. And I did. And then before you knew it, like, I don't have to fly out there, but I'm handling those accounts, but I'm not getting paid like he got paid to handle those accounts. Cause they're not going to give you, like, they're not going to take someone who's making like, I made like, I don't know, 60 or 80 grand the first year. He's making hundreds of thousands and I'm a new guy out of college. So they're not going to, but they'll take my work for the same productivity and not pay the money. They'll do that for sure. So then I knew if I wanted the money for that work I was doing, I would have to change companies and go to another company and do that level of work. And then they're fine with paying you that because they're not giving you some big hike and raise. Right. So there are occasions where those sort of things go on and go about. But in your case, you wrote these, policies and specifications that weren't being utilized, but when you went back, you got them into utilization, and that made a big difference. And then you had that absence in the bridge of communication that could have kept you on and helped you grow with that company, because the person you're talking to didn't know how to showcase to that other person who might have an ego check that Mike's going to make more money than you, right? So he just said, like, he blurted, "Oh, you making too much money." And who wants to hear that? Oh, does that mean I'm bringing in too much money for the company? I'm confused. I thought this is what I do, you know? I've been in those situations before. Then you have to have the conversation and explain, because sometimes if it's not a chairman, CEO, or CFO, people don't know how money comes in, and they might see you making buku bucks. And it's like, well, you brought in a corporate relationship and now 60 people in the company have work for the next 6 months because of conversations you had. That's valuable, right? And so if you can't explain, so it was, you were able to do it, but you weren't able to articulate the value of what you do and the nuance with which and the eloquence with which you could have those conversations and not ruffle feathers politically, which is, it's a practiced art. It's not coming out of high school with those skills. It's not coming out of college with those skills. Like, you have to be hands-on in the field, working at it every day to develop those skills. So,
Everyone's doing some kind of self-help these days, and you can find a million self-help courses out there. Most other courses out there are hosting lectures, they're hosting videos, they're maybe even doing Q&As, and these are great starting points to encourage learning. But at AUTONOMY, we believe that hands-on practice is the best way to really lock in what we're learning. There's no better way to gain confidence and mastery than through action. After each lecture, we practice the concepts we've learned with other students, giving and receiving feedback in a non-judgmental environment. The result is mastery of concepts like entrepreneurship, ethical sales, and self-reliance in an environment that directly translates to the real world. Plus, you make connections with other like-minded individuals who are learning right alongside you, and you have a lifetime membership in the community. The AUTONOMY course with Richard Grove equips you with confidence, competence, and courage in a world filled with confusion and noise. You can learn more at getautonomy.info. We'll see you there.